move Algeria forward on the political timeline.
But Scott, I mean, from the Western perspective that you're coming from, to make that move toward democracy, you take the risk, that what some label as the risk, that was taken in the Palestinian territories that brought Hamas to power. I mean, that's what concerns. Yeah, go ahead.
What I'm saying is that you can't be presented with that false dichotomy forever. There has to be. It's inconceivable to me that in a country the size and of the diversity of Algeria, that if you begin to open up a little bit, not all at once, not everything all at once, but that you begin to have people become accustomed to political participation, political bargaining, etc. It's not going to be easy, but ultimately what I am concerned about with what Murad says is that if you don't do something along these lines, then you're only going to make the situation for yourself worse later. Right. I would not argue that things in Iraq, for instance, are hunky-dory, but the fact is there's a political process in which real compromises are being reached, and for the long term, that's much more healthy for the society. And my concern about Algeria, given its population, is that if you don't begin to open the political process in some way, the pressure will build and the frustration will build, and you'll be right back where you started from in the early 90s. Okay,
let me get Jean's response and then Emil.
Yeah, well, I understand what's being said, but still I fundamentally disagree. I don't know whether Amal or Muhad were in Algeria during the 1990s, especially the mid-90s, when the major terrorism was going on, the big massacres of Blida, Bentala, and so on. It was a totally different situation, very stressful. I'm surprised the Algerian people even pulled out of that situation. Now we have to know what we want. We criticize the military for being in charge of the government, but at the same time, certain Western governments are thankful to the Algerian generals for having resolved more or less. There is still some residual terrorism. But I want to go back on this notion of our very clear-cut, cloisonné vision of the world. You take a state like Israel. They've had 3 prime ministers who were former terrorists. They were leaders of terrorist groups: Shamir, Begin, Ben-Gurion. I'm talking about Irgun, Stern, and Haganah. And yet, maybe those were the men of the situation. So it depends. The situation that Algeria is coming out of is no common situation. Now, the progress to our vision of democracy may be slow in coming as far as our standards are concerned. But if you compare Algeria to the neighboring countries, as Amal did with Tunisia, I'll compare Algeria with Morocco, which is a tyranny in every definition of the word. And Morocco's invasion and annexation of Western Sahara is probably the fundamental reason that Saddam was encouraged to annex Kuwait. But we just don't see this. That's the way things sit.
Okay, Emil, your comments quickly before we move on to, or actually, I'm sorry, Scott, if you really need to respond, go ahead.
No.
You'd rather pass on that one. Emil, go ahead.
Thanks. No, I would just like to comment on Dhina's point and the role of the opposition. I mean, I'm still convinced that even if you don't believe that the result would be fair at the end of the day because it will be manipulated by the ruling elite, you still have to be present in the political arena. You still have to participate and to get involved in politics, because that's the sense of building a democracy, and that's the main mistake of the opposition in Algeria, and that's what led to the situation that we are experiencing today, is that they just withdraw from the political arena. They just waited for the miracle democracy, which won't come without the efforts of a common society, and that's why maybe Bouteflika could have been the man of the situation that you are waiting for, but he won't be able to rule a country on his own, and he needs to work with all the other political actors who may disagree with his politics. And what we are seeing now is that we don't have any negotiation dynamics. We just have, parties that are frameworks for bargaining votes, for bargaining favors, and so on, and especially helping with the climate and the context of a rentier state that Algeria is just becoming more and more.
Okay. Scott, let me ask you a question. I mean, what struck some as a bit bizarre, this pushing for abolishing presidential term limits, because most people assume that is for the sole purpose of letting Bouteflika run for a 3rd term. People doubted this. Western Algerians themselves, that he would bother pushing for this because he's 71 years old. I mean, he was flown to France for emergency surgery less than a few years ago. He's not in the best shape, and people saw him as really wearing out. And that if this constitutional amendment were passed to abolish term limits, it couldn't really be for Bouteflika because he's physically not prepared. I want to know what you actually make of that, and if it's not for Bouteflika, then what is it for?
Of course it's for Bouteflika. I think that the constellation of forces that are in Algeria right now want to see a continuity of the status quo, and will do what they can to preserve it because they like the way things are. Bouteflika is a known quantity. He projects to the Algerian people a sense of stability, but also he's not willing to push too hard on the military or to open up to focus on the truth part of truth and reconciliation. And for those reasons, he's a comforting figure. Whether he wants to stay or wants to go is not really his choice. I think that he has to stay because of the deals that have been cut politically within Algeria for his political party that I don't know where it would go without him. Because of, as Amel says, there's no new blood coming up around him. If there were, then I think this whole issue about a third term would be less relevant because there would be new leadership that would naturally take over. But that's the paucity of a system like this where it can't produce new leadership. It can't produce new blood, and that's a fundamental challenge. Like any society, if it's not moving forward, if it's not breathing, it's going to be dying, and that's the problem with the political situation, I think, exactly. There.
Let's not speak about, let's say, people's interest, Algerian people's interest, but let's just speak about Bouteflika's and the ruling elite's interest. Is of their interest to open, at least at the minimum, the political process in the country? How did they survive during the 90s? They survived in co-opting Islamist parties such as the Hamas, the Islah, and so on. They integrated these parties in the state. They created the presidential alliance, and they survived like this. They integrated the RND and so on. Now they are just moving forward and not realizing that is it of their interest to open, even if it's just a very restricted circus, to open it at a minimum.
Okay, Murad, we're down to our last few minutes, so let me end on a question that I was asking you during the break. I mean, if a free and fair election were held in Algeria tomorrow, in which all parties, including your movement, were allowed to participate, do you think Bouteflika would win?
I don't think he would win because, you see, Bouteflika would fail if he was confronted politically to any real opposition. The problem is that he does not even accept that challenge. And this is why, as an opposition movement, we are now viewing it clearly that the message now and the conclusion is that the change in Algeria can only come out of the institutions agreed by the current regime. And this is why now we are really starting to work seriously for a coalition to create a new opposition elite which will act in a non-violent change of this regime. We need non-violence because Algeria has suffered more than anybody else about terrorism, violence, and which I may say, and contrary to what Jean Lamour said, is to some big proportions the fact and the action from the generals. The generals did not save the people. They were the reason for the murders, most of them. And this is what we are asking, why we're asking initially to have a true truth and reconciliation process, not in the kind that was giving impunity to all criminals, and I say here all of them, and mainly the generals. So now there will be a move out of the official institutions, that mean not through the current political process that is tolerated by the current regime, with a non-violent change that will occur in Algeria.
Okay, 10 seconds, Sean, if you can finish a response there.
My response is I agree with certain things that Murad says. However, my faith in the Algerian people, knowing them pretty well, is immeasurable. I think that the Algerian will find their solution, that the government will find a solution too. They're very strong people, and I cannot see the Algerian people being cowed. It's just not possible.
Okay. Actually, you believe, very quickly, Bouteflika would win if an election were held?
I don't know, but to comment on Murad's point, I think that you need to work with the regime. You won't bring change outside of the regime, and that's what led us to the situation that we are experiencing now. And even, socializing people in the regime and giving them the opportunity to change things will have a strong impact and a strong effect.
Okay, Amel, you will have the final word. Murad, I'm so sorry I can't get you a response. I know all the best stuff happens at the end of the program, but we're completely out of time. So I'd like to thank all four of you so much for joining us tonight, and our viewers for tuning in as well. Another edition then on Monday. Bonsoir.